Next up is Aiden Hornsby, a research leader with a passion for enabling teams with the tools, methods, and expertise needed to do great research. Part philosophical thought experiment, part tactical advice, Escaping Research Island is a presentation for shifting your research from an isolated model to an embedded one. Let's check it out.
Hi, I'm Dr. Aiden Hornsby, and welcome to Escaping Research Island. I'm going to tell you a little tale about how your teams can maybe survive, thrive on Research Island, and maybe even find yourselves on continuous discovery continent. Today I'm going to share with you, a little overview on Research Island and what that means through the lens of a little story I'll tell you about a product team who has found themselves stranded on Research Island. I'm also going to tell you a little terminology to start us out. I'll use the term researchers kind of interchangeably here to talk about both the act of doing research and, capital R researchers, people who are researchers by trade, like myself, subject matter experts, and similar. The reason I'll do that is because I think it's really important for everyone to be involved in research. And we'll talk about that a lot today as we get through this. But that terminology comes, from a saying that my friend came up with, a good close colleague and friend, Colin Pratt, and I were talking about, how do we get more teams engaged with research and what does it mean to be a research expert versus someone who just does research for the, utility of a project. And she came up with kind of two things. Capital R research being, again, subject matter experts, people like myself who are user researchers, market researchers, data scientists, quantitative folks and qualitative folks alike. These are people really steeped in this subject matter and who are experts and can really help guide and move projects forward. The other type of researcher are lowercase r researchers, and that's kind of everyone else. If you've done a Google search before, you are a lowercase r researcher and you're doing some form of lowercase r research. I think it's important to kind of name this early on so you understand when I'm using these things interchangeably. Sometimes I'm referring to those capital R researcher folks, and then sometimes I'm referring to us doing the act of research. And I think it's important, because whether you're a researcher here today, or a designer or a PM or someone invested or involved in the product space, all of us should have input and our hands in research. We should be embedded and empowered to do awesome research. And I'll mention that a few times today as we kind of move through this. But let me tell you a little bit of story about a product team who's found themselves on Research Island. So to kick us off, I'm going to talk about the current state of research and kind of the field that we're playing in right now. I think it's important to talk about that because the research industry has changed a lot in the last few years. And you've likely seen a lot of researchers being laid off, especially in the last year. That's really shifted and changed the dynamic of how research functions on our product teams. And I think it's really important to talk about whether you're, again, a researcher or someone involved in research. And I hope, researchers that are on the call with us today, you feel affirmed, maybe invalidated by some of the things I'll share. And then maybe if you're not a researcher, it'll help you empathize and understand what researchers are going through right now and kind of the space we're playing in. You also might yourself feel affirmed if you're a designer who's maybe been stuck with research in the past or something similar. And then I'll tell you again a little bit of a story about a product team that finds themselves on Research Island. And then we'll tell you how they got to continuous discovery continent. And I'll provide you some helpful tips at the end just that have helped me and my teams get to continuous discovery continent and really thrive there. And I hope what I share with you today, you'll be able to take home with your teams and take to work with your teams and do great research. So let's dive in. Of course, what would a presentation be without a quote to start us off? And I think this one's really important because it kind of encapsulates the central tenet of what I'm going to be talking about today. This is from a really influential and awesome research leader here in our field, Behzad Shirjani. If you have not checked out his stuff, definitely give it a look. And, what he shares here is essentially that research can act like a black box, but as the more that we involve product teams and show them the value of what they're doing and also show them that what they're already doing is research, the more everyone can get really aligned and down with continuous discovery. What I'm not saying here is to democratize research. What I'm saying is we should really be enabling and empowering product teams to do great research with the support and help of capital R researchers. Everyone already does research, so it's really just about leveling everyone up. But let's talk about where we get caught up first. In my career, I've really seen two main frameworks or models for how organizations, distribute or organize research throughout their company. And these two, there's many more, but these are really the two primary things that I've seen or encountered, in my experience. The first is distributed research. Distributed research models are pretty common. It's likely that you've got research teams, but they're kind of scattered across an organization. Maybe they are actually literally in their own little islands or in black boxes, where teams are having to kind of reach out to them and ask for support or help, or maybe ship off projects to them, and hope that they get quality or helpful insights back quickly enough to make good decisions on them, which is very rare, especially in UX immature organizations like healthcare and other areas, where those teams are really focused on long-term strategy and not necessarily the tactical support or work that our product teams really need. So these distributed models really act as silos. You might have market researchers, data scientists, user researchers scattered across a company, but they're really not centralized or organized in a meaningful way. They don't have things like repositories or shared insights, and that just means that no one's benefiting from the other research that's happening across an organization. So it might exist, right? Research might exist, but it's not necessarily a cohesive unit, and it's not really supporting everyone who's doing the research. It's kind of supporting individual projects or initiatives or things like that. The other model that I've seen really frequently is non-existent research. And so a lot of times organizations don't have any research capabilities at all, but they do have folks doing research. In my opinion, that can be really dangerous. When you don't have the tools, protocols, and practices, you can run into some ethical problems conducting research as non-researchers. And, research is incredibly valuable to an organization, whether it's in the long-term strategy or in the short-term strategy. And so having folks around that are really able to support and, scale research effectively, can help, a company not make quick or short-sighted decisions, but really be user-centered and data-backed. And I'll talk a little bit about that more, but in a non-existent research model, it's just that, right? You might have a researcher here and there, but it's, again, not distributed, not really centralized at all, and you're probably not getting super helpful insights. Something that also happens in a non-existent research model is that teams tend to be really output or delivery focused. And I'll talk a little bit about that later and what the problems of that are. But that's the opposite of continuous discovery. And so we need teams to be doing their own research in order to have a continuous discovery mindset. And so we'll talk about that again a little bit later, but just to set a framework of kind of the two things that I've seen most common in the industry. So maybe you're on Research Island now. Maybe you know someone on Research Island. You probably do. And, Research Island is kind of just that. It acts as a Bermuda Triangle of insights. Product teams really, have to ship off their problems or their questions and then hope that they get insights back quickly enough to really act on them. And it's a really more of a strategic thing than it is tactical, which again, product teams really need that tactical, in motion research. And I've seen this a lot at UX immature organizations, again, like healthcare or some of these big machines that move really slowly. And the problem is that it gives research a bad reputation all around, right? When you're on Research Island, the research teams themselves get a bad reputation for being slow and not tactical. The product teams get a bad reputation for being output or delivery focused and not necessarily user-centered. And then the business suffers, from making those short-sighted decisions and not, again, being user-centered. And again, something important to highlight here is when teams or product teams are output or delivery focused, that's the antithesis of continuous discovery. And if you haven't already, shameless plug, if you haven't picked up a copy of Teresa Torres's Continuous Discovery Habits, awesome book where she really talks about and digs into shifting product teams from waterfall, to this continuous discovery framework or mindset and practice where research is seamlessly embedded in the work and it's constantly delivering helpful insights and everyone is involved. It's again, a collaborative effort. I think something to add to her work here is that I really believe that product teams benefit and need the support of capital R researchers to, again, provide some of the, boundaries and provide some of the support that those product teams need to do great research. That's things like methods and tools and best practices, stuff that product teams shouldn't have to know. And so I'll add a little bit onto that, just in that, let's bring some capital R researchers back to the table, but at the same time, enabling and empowering product teams to do great research, whether they have a researcher with them or not. So what does Research Island look like? Let me tell you a little tale of a product team who's found themselves stranded on Research Island. The first thing the product team does is turn on each other, right? No one wants responsibility for research. It's just human nature. PMs don't have the skills or capacity for it usually. Engineers don't want to touch research with a 10-foot pole. And designers, if you're with me, designers usually get stuck with the research. So the product team is really playing nose goes with research. No one wants responsibility for it, and it's seen as a burden. And in that case, there's very little time or effort placed on planning research, which, as any researcher like myself knows, that's where we really add the most value, is at the beginning, out the gate of a project. And so if no one wants to take responsibility in the beginning for research, it ends up just being something tactical that's kind of slapped at the end of a build. Planning research is really where you should spend the most time, so that you ensure that your project is going to solve for the problems that you need to solve for, and that it's going to be user-centered and data-backed and all of those good things. So if no one wants to take responsibility for research in the beginning, you're really skipping the most critical step. This means that product teams are usually waiting to the last minute to do research and calling it validation because they're testing what they've already built. I also see teams in this way as only using user researchers for that validation step, for usability testing, which is like the biggest waste of all, to only use researchers in that way. And in fact, product teams, again, should really excel at usability testing. Designers and PMs, they should really be owning that form of research, that methodology. And it's important, again, for continuous discovery that those individuals feel empowered and enabled to do research and do great usability testing by those capital R researchers. The other issue that I see is teams relying on the scientific method. I see a lot of product teams and even researchers applying mistakenly the scientific method to the work that we do. Now, the reason that the scientific method doesn't necessarily make sense here is because you're setting out what I see teams do, right? Is that out the gate, they make hypotheses. And as soon as I see teams making hypotheses, I already know they're headed in the wrong direction. See, the issue with a hypothesis is that, it comes from academia. And as a scholar and a researcher, I had to do my due diligence when I wrote my hypotheses. And that's because, again, if you're writing an academic paper, 70% of that paper is a literature review. And you spend 90% of your time writing that literature review. And again, exploring and defining the problem space. We don't have time to do that in industry. And so we really don't have time to write good hypotheses because we're not able to do the groundwork necessary to really write those. Instead, I would love to see teams shift to assumptions and absolutely name and write your assumptions. But if you're writing your hypotheses, then you're just going to go out and test those hypotheses. And the problem with that is that, again, that is the antithesis of continuous discovery. Really, your research and your discovery should be grounded in what you're learning, and so that you're starting to evolve and see insights emerge from the ground up. And then you can shift and adapt from there. And while it's important to name your assumptions, I think it's more important that teams don't necessarily make guesses out the gate and then go try to test them. This is where continuous discovery becomes a mindset, not just a practice or a framework or, some validation testing that you slapdash at the end of a build. So back to our product trio. So they're on Research Island and they're gonna face some really tough trials while they're there. And these are things that you've probably come across in your work as well. So to name a few of those trials, I'll start with the ethical trapdoor. So a lot of times, because product teams are waiting to the last minute to do research and they're not necessarily placing a ton of time or effort into planning really good research practices, there tends to be a lot of problems that arise in an ethical way. I see this a lot for teams that maybe don't incentivize their participants properly. They don't actually bring in actual customers. And then maybe the worst of all is they're not having their participants sign NDAs. Now, I've seen a lot of this in different areas, and I myself have come across some of this where we had a client who asked us to do some standard research by going out and recording their competitors' product demos and then bringing those back to them to validate and prioritize their roadmap. As a capital R researcher, I immediately raised red flags where some other folks didn't. And so I think it's important that that product teams have some guardrails around their research and some best practices and especially some protocols to really protect participants and the business from unethical research practices. The next is the research report spike pit. So this is where research reports go to die. If you are waiting to deliver a final report for a research project, you have unfortunately waited too long. Often if you've waited that long, really the opportunity to inform critical decisions has probably lapsed. And again, that's kind of research reports, they typically die in SharePoint folders buried somewhere else. And so we'll talk about what you can do instead of this a little bit later. But this is what our product team is coming across right now, is this research report spike pit. The next one is the DIY makeshift raft. And this is the only way the product team really knows how to get off of Research Island. And maybe, this product team is able to ship and deliver their products, but they're not user-centered, data-backed, or really well-informed. And so maybe you can get a little bit out to sea on this DIY raft, but you're not going to be able to survive for very long. The goal is to fill in those holes with the support of a capital R researcher so that you have a life raft that will help you, maybe survive. So teams might be able to ship and deliver products, but they're not user-centered or data-backed or really well-informed long-term business decisions. And I get it, research ROI is often ambiguous at best, and research leaders on Research Island want quantifiable value and quick results. And so that can be really challenging for product teams who need to ship and deliver quickly, but it inevitably means that they're going to do so with all these holes in it. So I'll share with you a little bit later what the opposite of this is, but good research really requires thoughtfulness, cohesiveness, and collaboration. Some things that can be really challenging when you're on a deadline, but that's what's really necessary to ensure that you can build a life raft that will actually save you. So to get off of Research Island, back to our product team. They've gone through the trials. Now they must make their daring escape. Well, what they realize is actually the way off of Research Island is in. And this team in particular has a really important conversation. See, they meet with their product team, including their leadership, to right-size their research effort, to understand the problems that they're looking to solve for, and hopefully with the expertise of a capital R researcher, are really able to support and scale that research appropriately so that it can adapt and evolve over time. And this product team did just that. So this team had a critical conversation. They gathered, including their leadership, to have a thoughtful and collaborative conversation about how to right-size their research effort to solve the problems that they're looking to solve for. And again, they were human-centered, keeping the human experience at the center of everything they're planning to do. And this team in particular, they called in research expertise to support and scale that research effort appropriately and to help them create some guardrails around their next steps and actions. And in a flash, our product team is transported to continuous discovery continent, where their research and their products are user-backed, human-centered, data-informed, and good long-term business strategies. And I think most importantly, they're team approved. But obviously, it's not that easy to get to continuous discovery continent. So let me share with you some helpful tips that have helped my teams not only get here, but thrive in this new land. The first and most obvious one are Kanbans, or similar types of project management tools, where you're able to track research right there simultaneously alongside everything else with your project. I think it's really important to do this, and research should be really tracked in a minute way too. Every little thing that you're doing, everyone should be involved in it, and then it should also be tracked visibly, so that it's also really tactical. It's again visible, and I think importantly, it's differentiated from design. And so when you have research tracked in this way, you can really see it seamlessly woven into the work we do in a continuous way, rather than in it being kind of these big chunks that then get offloaded to researchers, that project management gets offloaded to them, and then it becomes, again, a black box. So the opposite of that is really tracking research and all the little tasks that come along with it and assigning it to individuals on the product team, so that it's really visible and tactical, and helpful. The next are pre-kickoff plan reviews. I think these are absolutely critical. So I say get jacked with your pre-kickoff project plan from your neighborly researcher. But it's important, again, to do this kind of stuff at the beginning of a project. So bringing research expertise in, the best time to do that is before you kick off a project. Again, that's going to provide you with the support and expertise that you need to scale or appropriately size that research effort. Another thing, too, is that capital R researchers in this way, when you involve them in that pre-kickoff space in that time, you're really able to get some critical information about the methods, the tools that you might have at your disposal, and other types of best practices, templates, and tools, all those kinds of things that can really jumpstart your research efforts and make it really easy for the whole team to be involved in research. So do those pre-kickoff plan reviews or project reviews, and try to do them with a research expert. Another one are weekly insights reviews. So, we talked about the research report spike pit. This is the opposite of that. It looks like doing weekly insight reviews with the whole team. And so again, if your whole team is involved in research, everyone's going to have something to share. So it's great as if you're doing continuous discovery, you're constantly evolving new insights. People can have great discussions and conversation during those weekly insight reviews. They can, ask questions and, try to adjust the research moving forward appropriately, so you can solve for those new problems as they arise. And so those weekly insights, reviews, those can be really helpful for the team. They're super collaborative and fun, and that's really one of the ways that you can make research feel accessible to your whole team, and feel like they have a part in doing something awesome. The next is to make it your own. I've seen countless variations of the Dumble Diamond framework or similar discovery processes, and you don't need those to get started today. I see tons of teams waiting too long because they don't have these processes set up to start doing good research. You don't need repositories or really even tools or methods or playbooks to do great research today. In my opinion, all you really need is Maze, a continuous discovery mindset, and some users to test with. And you can start doing great research today. So don't get caught up too much in the background operations process and things like that. That is best left to capital R researchers and research experts. But you can start doing great research today, even if you just have a product team at your hands. And, of course, I have to say, find a research buddy, or in this case, a research wizard. It's so important that teams have that expertise around, even if it's just one or two leaders who can come in and do those pre-kickoff plan reviews with you, who can answer questions along the way and really handle all that background operations stuff that's necessary for product teams to do great research. So even if you don't have that at your disposal within your organization, find a research buddy. You reach out to me if you need to, but find someone who can really help you answer questions, and know what the, best opportunities or best things and tools and tricks that you have at your disposal. Those are folks like myself that are embedded in this field, in this industry. We're here to help, and we love working on this stuff. Generally, at least I do. And so I think it's important to just build a relationship with researchers, whether they're on your teams or not. And lastly, just like the Lorax, we all speak for the users. If everyone's a researcher and everyone speaks for the user, they will most certainly be heard. So again, don't forget, you're a researcher, everyone's a researcher, and we all speak for the user. And it's so important that we do that, and that we do those in meaningful ways, so that we're actually doing UX. Whether our leaders are willing to admit it or not, we can't do UX without research. And so everyone jump on board, be a researcher, speak for the trees and speak for the users, and they will definitely be heard. And that wraps up my talk with you today. So thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you've learned something today, something useful. And if you're a researcher, maybe hopefully you've been a little affirmed and validated. I know when I hear these things, I am too. And please reach out if you want to connect or stay in touch. And if you've got questions about research, I'd love to answer them. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.